It's Sunday, August 28th, 2016, and this is the Product Mentor Talk. Today, we're joined by one of our mentors, Alex Berman, UX team lead at Rubenstein Technology Group, and he's going to lead a talk today on managing mixed role teams and delivering an awesome product. I think something we would all appreciate and all are striving towards. So for those of you maybe joining us for the first time today, let me just briefly explain the format. The person speaking today is one of the mentors in the Product Mentor Program, which is a global organization. We're in over 20 countries around the world, where we pair up mentors and mentees in the field of product management, helping make better product people, better product decisions, and as well, better products. And so let me just tell you a little bit about myself. I am Jeremy Horn, also known as the Product Guy, and I'll be moderating as the questions come in today. So for those of you who are joining us, you're probably joining us from the productmentor.com/live. We're at the top of the page. You can see the live video, myself talking right now. And on the bottom of that page, you can post your questions. As the questions come in, I'll hand them over to Alex in fairly real time. The more generic questions, if they're not topically relevant, more generic product management questions, I will always save for the end of the talk, so where Alex can speak to them at that point in time. But with all that said, let me hand it over to Alex to take it away. And there you go, Alex.
All right, thank you, Jeremy. Okay, so let's get this up and running. All right, so my discussion today is managing mixed role teams and delivering an awesome product. As Jeremy said, my name is Alex Berman, user experience team lead at the Rubenstein Technology Group. So, when you start any kind of project like this, you have a kind of a variety of components, which is what you see here. So you have designs, you have business requirements, you have, in this case, a content management system. There's the development team, the vision, budget, timeline. You have, in this case, 2 distinct companies, 2 different methodologies. And we really have to take all of those, marry them together, and at the end of the day, the finish line, which is delivering that awesome product to the client. So the case study that I'm outlining here, there are a couple of fairly unique, I think, challenges and ingredients to it that are definitely worth kind of observing, and I will go into those in more depth. Yeah, so let's the next one. So kind of setting the scene. So the client in this case is a world-class design firm, and they wanted a new website and a CMS to kind of back up the website to match their new company direction. And so these guys had started out over 30 years ago, print-focused. And that was really up until maybe 3 or 4 years ago where their focus was. And then as interactive design became more and more important and more brands started moving towards it, they realized that with the skill set they had in-house, it was time to kind of reinvigorate their brand and refocus it. And so they came to us, the Rubenstein Technology Group, to help deploy a new CMS, that's the product, and a new website, which is the project, and to really help them achieve that vision. And so one of the challenges, a couple of the challenges with this kind of whole project is that the client and the designer, as I've noted here, are the same agency. And so the same people that were coming to us with this request were also the designers for it. And that's certainly something where you have to really manage them, especially the managing partners who may not necessarily have a whole lot of day-to-day interaction with the project, but they are certainly designers themselves and have strong opinions that way. And additionally, because I work at a smaller firm, there are about 30 of us, the line between product and project is kind of blurred. And so in many cases, we take a stock product, in this case, a stock CMS, and we will customize it based on our particular customer's needs. And then out of that customization, a lot of the most important elements will get fed back into the core product. So it's a lot different than at bigger companies where you have distinct blocks, distinct teams for these different sections. So just kind of to set expectations. So, a lot of these can seem fairly straightforward, but definitely, it's something that forget unless you remind them. So in this case, because the designer is also the client, this was a much more straightforward exercise, but in many ways, a complicated design, and by this I mean an interactive design, means that you need lots and lots of development time, especially as we're developing across multiple devices, multiple screen sizes. It was a flex responsive site, and so that meant that even though we have specific breakpoints, count the in-between. So all of that can take a lot of development time, and especially if you have a lot of complicated animations and kind of fade-ins, fade-outs, and a lot of images. Like, all this takes a lot of time, and this can even apply to what seems like a simple design. Basically, again, you're working across a multitude of environments and need to make sure that everything works in all of those environments. And it's important to say that most things can be done. So if there's a design element, I don't remember a time in the last probably 2 years when I've said, no, that cannot be done. That the team that is making this investment, they have to be willing to make the appropriate level of investment in both money and time. And so since those very rarely exist in unlimited quantities, balance is key. And then finally, it's important to note that an awesome product or project, it doesn't mean that it's perfect. As with so many things, this is an iterative experience. And so what we deployed back in March is definitely not the same thing that is deployed now. And in fact, the client has just submitted a redesign for one of the interior templates. So that just goes to show that all these projects are living, breathing things, and it's important not to get caught up in the pursuit of perfection, because quite frankly, you're probably never going to get there. In this case, we just went for awesome, and I think we hit that, and we're going to kind of walk through how we did it. So let's start with the stuff that at the start of the project was known, kind of old hand stuff. We're regular collaborators with this design agency. We do probably 6 to 8 different projects with them a year, ranging from $100,000 engagements all the way up to multi-million-dollar engagements. So we've worked with them at all different levels of projects, and they've seen pretty regularly that we deliver really high-quality software, and we know that they deliver very innovative designs. And so with that in mind, this collaboration really started off with very, very high expectations of one another based on our shared work experience. A couple of things to note is that even though we collaborated a lot, the client had never actually worked in the content management system that they were buying. They knew it existed, they knew it was flexible, and they knew it could take into account all the different scenarios that they could pretty much dream up, and that the team supporting it was all onshore. So with Rubenstein Technology Group, we're all based in Manhattan. I sit 15 feet from the developers, and that was something that they knew they could rely on. Sorry, I'm just consulting my notes here. Something also to take into account is that with this site, we were deploying site copy. I'm actually not sure what CMS they had backing up their old site. I think it was Escort, which, if you're not familiar with, is not a very popular one, and it's very, very antiquated. So we are deploying entirely new site copy, which means that we are migrating over to the new site relatively little, and we're doing new images and different kind of file types so that we could take advantage of the flex responsive state. And so what this meant is that in terms of developing the product for the client, we had to take into account what they needed immediately to prove kind of MVP and what we need to make available then, and then what could wait to the latter parts, to the later parts of the project once we got closer to launch, kind of what are the nice to haves. And so that was something that we had to work through and make sure that we were kind of nailing. And then the fourth bullet point is for breakpoints. And so with breakpoints, what's interesting there is that the move to responsive design, and especially flex responsive, means that the concept of breakpoints has much less meaning than it did previously. The reason being that breakpoints help you with even with responsive, they help you decide, like, you're going to have this particular look, and at this point you're going to have this particular look, and in tablet it'll look like this, and in mobile it'll look like this. What it doesn't take into account is what are all the in-between states, and so that's really the kind of tricky stuff here. And this was all new. This was all new. You know, they hadn't had it on their website before, and so we were taking them through this for the very first time, and at the same time kind of implementing their designs and working with them through that. So it was definitely an experience that was it was an interesting experience, and we'll get into that in a little bit. And finally, the new thing was the team. So even though we've collaborated with these guys a fair amount, I'd actually only ever worked with one of the designers on the project, not the project manager, not the lead designer, and they had never really worked with our development team kind of on a one-to-one basis. So that was all new. And a lot of that was making sure that from a methodology standpoint, from a vocabulary standpoint, from an education standpoint, that we were kind of covering all of our bases and making sure that, you know, even though we'd worked with them a lot, that we weren't kind of taking that for advantage. So here's the teams that worked on the project. So we have 2 PMs, myself, and then my counterpart. 4 designers from the agency that are also their clients. We have 3 developers, 1 QA tester, and then 5 partners. So there are 2 partners on my side and 3 partners on the other. And why that's important to kind of note is that these are not people that are involved on a day-to-day basis with the project and product development, but they are people that at the end of the day kind of sign the checks. And so even though they're not always immediately in the room, you always have to take their opinions and what their answers could possibly be into account, and just make sure that you know, you're not overlooking any details that you absolutely know they'll look for. And an additional reason why this is really important is that we work really closely together, and for the client side, they're trusting in us that we're going to be able to kind of take this design that they're work with their teams and implement it in such a way that they're really not sacrificing anything. And from our side, you know, this is a really important project to just kind of nail, because it is a relationship that we really value, and it's something where we know they've put a tremendous amount of trust in us, and it basically, we just got to nail it. That's really the prerogative from that. So the first step to kind of outlining how we are going to succeed and how we are going to deliver an awesome product and how we are going to integrate our teams. It's worth noting, again, these are 2 teams working very closely together from 2 different companies. And so use Google Sheets because of the collaborative nature of it to communicate quickly between the 2 of us. You know, we didn't have an integrated chat client or anything like that set up. We did have occasional Hangouts, but we mostly were doing phone calls, WebExes, and Google Sheets. In terms of project management, we used Smartsheet on our side, and they used Harvest on their side. And so, you know, in this respect, it was really, they were kind of 2 isolated tools. We gave each other insight into both, access to both purposes. In terms of what browsers we were going to be supporting, we were supporting the latest version of Google Chrome, IE 9+. So this IE 9+ thing is something that is a key differentiator for us, mainly because so many people now have kind of deprecated IE to an extent as basically a browser that nobody uses. But the fact of the matter is that many of our clients do, and if our direct clients, you know, like the marketing people or web people, IE, but many of their constituents, CMOs, CEOs, etc., do use it. So it's really important that we continue supporting this. We use 2 iPads for testing, an Air 2 and an iPad 3. You know, fairly straightforward. We tested on 3 different types of iPhones, so the iPhone 5, 6, and the 6 Plus. These were all supported devices, and so going back to that flex responsive, we need to make sure that this site looked great on all of these devices. Android's a little trickier. We used the Samsung 6 Plus. But even though Android is kind of moving more towards a standardized screen size and all that, it's still not quite to the point, and especially with most of our clients, most of them are not using Android phones, where we really pay anything more than like a cursory amount of attention to it. We used a wiki to manage it. It's nothing particularly sexy, just straight up media wiki with some, we put some enhancements on it, but certainly nothing like Confluence. And so that was our documentation tool. And then afterwards, once we had launched the site, we used Google Analytics and Google Tag Manager to track all this stuff. And then finally, on our side, we used Adobe Photoshop and Adobe Acrobat. So that's reviewing PSD files and PDFs. We're switching more and more over to Sketch and Zeppelin, but Photoshop is obviously a cornerstone of the design and interactive design agent world. And so that is what we continue to support. So step 2. Okay, so we've nailed down what tools we're going to be using. And this was all communicated in the first week of the project. Step 2 is, what is the schedule for this? And it's not just, okay, so here's day 1, here's day 100. Later we'll talk at day 100. This is how we're going to manage a tool, the schedule. We use Smartsheet as our tool for that. That fed into Google Calendar, which we shared events with the client to make sure that they got alerts and everything was kind of set up. We used email to set up the agenda and set the times for the Google Calendar events. Because the design partner is based in New York and fostering this intense collaboration, we had weekly in-person reviews and feedback. And then finally, we had to decide upon what's a delivery date. And so in a lot of cases, this is not an open-ended thing. Like, it's not like oh, how long will it take to develop? Fantastic. Let's go ahead and set at the end of development. It's more like the client usually has some sort of big presentation or unveiling already planned, and so that's kind of what we're working towards. In this case, they did, and we were working towards that launch date. The tool WebEx to facilitate our online calls. It's got screen sharing, recording. So again, it's not necessarily the sexiest tool in the shed, but it does work. This is a really important step. So we've now, we've now set up what tools we're going to use. What is our schedule? The next step is vocabulary. So this one is really important because so often you'll find that teams are speaking about the same things and they're using very, very different terms, and this can lead to considerable confusion, not resolved. That can lead to distrust, which can ultimately lead to an unproductive environment. So again, one of the first things we did was we tried to take the designs that we received at Rubenstein Tech. We reviewed the terminology that was handed over to us by the client, and then we came up with our own vocabulary for the development that we were going to do. So a particular module might be a content block, or it might be a content module, or it might be just a block, or something like that. So that's really what was important to kind of establish, was to agree upon a set of descriptive terms for the different site components. And this is not a one-way conversation. It was a relatively quick conversation, probably an hour or so. Right out, like, what are we going to call? We're going to call this, that. We're going to call this, that. We're going to call this, that. And so at the end of the day, what you get is essentially a dictionary for the project. And it really ensures that when someone says content block, everybody knows what they're talking about. When we say half-width content module, everybody knows what we're talking about. More importantly, everyone knows what goes into that. I've worked on many projects where you don't iron this out, and it almost inevitably leads to some level of confusion. Someone gets concerned, someone raises concerns to someone else, and then you're basically you're basically at the eye of the storm, and it's not a great place to be in. So that was something we wanted to nail right away. So step 4, now that you've figured out, okay, here's the language we're going to use, here's our schedule, here are the tools, what are the actual assets we're using? So in this case, we had approximately 30 PSDs, and that was the design deliverable. 5 InVision files. If you've never used InVision, it is It is a way for designers to basically upload, in this case, PSDs, kind of annotate them and implement a level of light animation to kind of show us how exactly it is that they envision things happening. As it is, they also provided us some one or two MP4s to showcase the different animations for the site. We also received 3 PDFs, and so these were mainly interaction guides, vocabulary guides, and a project schedule. And then finally, for the site itself, we used HTML5, JavaScript, CSS, Node.js, and Perl. And so that kind of encompasses everything we used for the site itself to build it, as well as the content management system in the background. So as we move through the project, we're having these regular conversations. We've agreed upon a whole set of parameters, and we're really kind of moving forward. But it's also important to note that the designer, who's also the client, has never actually worked in the CMS. And so once it got to a point where it was an approximation of what they could expect at delivery, we gave them access to the CMS, and we set up a number of tutorial sessions where we walk them through different aspects of the content management system, of the product that was being deployed to them, how it works, what they could expect, what was the effect on the front end, etc. At this point, once they get in there, we really start getting some really good feedback from the clients in terms of functionality, what works, what doesn't, and it's kind of above and beyond standard QA, which we also do in-house and as part of any project that we work on. This is more, you've taken the designs, you've implemented the designs, now the client is getting their hands on it, and they find out, oh, maybe this content block didn't work so well. Didn't work as well as we thought it would, and we want to change it to be this. So it's that kind of work that really takes place after you have handed over the product to the client. They've started working in it, and they kind of see, hey, maybe this didn't work as well as we thought it did. Additionally, there were some integrations, third-party integrations that were merged into it. So some things like email clients, CRMs, programs like that that are used in their existing system and need to be integrated into the new product, the new CMS that they're receiving. And so for those, we would do the work, usually using our own API. The client would go ahead and customize that, and so we'd give them tutorials in terms of how they could work with these different integrations, where they would work, what's the impact on the front end, etc. It's just worth calling out because it is above and beyond what the standard product offering is, even with customizations. What were some of the challenges? One of the challenges, even though we tried to iron it out at the beginning, was vocabulary. When you're working with teams that have very experienced people on them, even if you kind of outline things at the beginning, get confused, people forget, especially if it's not a term that they use on an everyday basis. And so throughout the project, we found that at key points, people would forget what we were calling block, and they would fall back on, they would call the 3-up content module. And we'd have to kind of scratch our heads, review the documents, kind of look back on it. And it's not really like a stop the project, stop the product development, we don't know what's going on, but more of a, this takes up time. If you are not sure and you have to ask questions, like that all soaks up time, and especially in working with a tight timeline, that's not really a situation where you want to get into it. The second thing was process. And so part of our process, and something that we arguably could have done a better job of explaining, was that we expected heavy feedback at all points in the project. It wasn't really something where we show the prototype, kind of the first draft, and we say, okay, we know this is perfect. Go ahead, do your thing. Don't give us any feedback. It's more of a, here's the prototype. We know it's pretty rough. We want your feedback so we can make the fixes now, propagate them as we build out the rest of the product and the site. And then hopefully when we get to the beta release, which is the last step before launch, we'll have ironed everything out, and any issues should be new ones if they're being brought up, and hopefully they're pretty minimal. In this case, something that we worked out. We all just kind of assumed, because we'd worked together, that we knew the process we would take. And so it turns out that the client feedback for the very end of the project. And so what that meant was that we got to the end of the project, we'd received minimal feedback, all of it pretty positive, and then all of a sudden they kind of dumped it on us. And so that was something that was kind of a problem, because we weren't expecting it. It made us feel like we looked like a bunch of schmucks. And then as part of the kind of post-launch retrospective, we found out that this was just part of their process, and they hadn't been aware of it, of what our process was, and all that. And so ironing that out was probably something we should have done better, and was definitely a significant challenge. It was the primary reason why, in order to meet the tight timeline, this project went over budget. Timelines. So the initial start to finish was about 12 weeks. Something where if we had better ironed out the process, it would have been much less of a scramble at the end. But because we hadn't, we ran into a few roadblocks. This turned into a significant challenge. At the end of the day, we did get it delivered on time, but it was not on budget. And that's obviously something that you always want to do, is deliver on budget, on time. So we did 50% of that. And certainly something where, in hindsight, should have ironed out that process, so we could have done that. The last thing was requirements. So like I'd mentioned before, or not the last thing, but one of the things is requirements. So like I had mentioned before, we had 5 partners involved in this project. And so the requirements that were handed to us at the beginning of the project were not necessarily the requirements halfway through the project. Once the product becomes unveiled and it becomes clear what kind of flexibility they're dealing with, and it means, they see that maybe some design elements don't work so well together, the clients start to see, oh, we got to change this, this, and that. We got to change this, this, and that. And then we got to change that, change this, and they seem like little things, but they kind of build up. And so as your requirements change, even though the overall requirement didn't change, the specifics did. And that was something that definitely complicated the project a lot more, especially when you're dealing with people on both sides who are both personal friends, but this is also a business transaction. It can get a little bit thorny. And so that is something where, leading into my last point, it's a challenge. Like, where do you say no and where do you say yes, especially when these are people that you collaborate with a fair amount? Should we have said no more? Probably. We didn't really say it enough times. Sometimes you just say yes because it's a business relationship, and if there's a cost, then there's a cost, but you're going to work together a lot, so it's easier to say yes. But sometimes it's just better to say no, especially when you're dealing with tight timelines, changing requirements, and in hindsight, an uncertain process. We did okay with all of this, but certainly something that we could have done better. So all that said, what worked? So we did have excellent inter-team communication. A lot of that was because we had set the tools. We set up what tools you're going to be using very early on in the process, and we kind of outlined, like, we'll communicate using these channels. Here's your designated point person, and these are the people that we do in communication. Anything outside of that, and you better CC someone or kind of ramp it up. Leading out of that, we had a clear chain of command, and so there were designers and there were developers and there was QA and all that, but at the end of the day, the project managers on both sides kind of stood at the top. And even with the partners and kind of those changing requirements, they were pretty good about pushing them all through the points of contact. And so there's a very clear chain of command or chain of contact. Mutual respect. This project did get a little tense towards the end, if only because of the tight timelines and changing requirements and kind of all these different process challenges. But we definitely continued to respect each other throughout the process, and were able to go out to dinner and kind of have a great time afterwards. We had a common goal, and that certainly helped here. Like the goal is to further our relationship, give them a fantastic site, give them a fantastic product to kind of support that site, and get the thing launched. And we did that. Really, really well was training and training videos. And so they asked lots of questions. We answered lots of questions. We kind of anticipated them because of our experience, a lot of the questions they would ask. And then most importantly, we provided recaps and videos so that there was always a record, because the assumption is the person you're talking with now in 5 years is probably not going to be the same person. It could be, but it probably won't be. Those people can up and go. What didn't work? Timelines. They were very, very tight. And, so when the feedback loop and the feedback timing kind of started breaking down, that's when we got kind of challenged in that respect. Again, we hit the timeline that was outlined, but I think we could have done it with a significantly less kind of headache than we did if we had kind of ironed out those process requirements at the beginning. And then finally was the feedback expectations. And so again, our expectation was we would receive intense feedback all the way through the process. Their expectation was more like, we'll let Rubenstein Tech develop, and then at the end, we'll kind of lay it all on them. Both are very valid approaches. The problem was we didn't set those expectations up at the beginning, and so that was something that I felt like didn't work. So what are kind of the key takeaways from all this? So to develop and deploy a really great product, I think you need to do these things, which is one, collaborate. So it seems like a no-brainer, but it's more like talk to each other, listen to each other, take feedback, adjust, be flexible. In a word, communicate and collaborate with one another. There's always going to be something that you don't know. There's always going to be something that they don't know. So it's important to kind of, the expectation should be nobody knows anything. And so you should be as specific as possible, because you never know when you're going to meet that person who really doesn't know anything. And you're going to have to educate them. The last thing was one of the last things is set clear expectations. And so it's really important at the beginning of the project and all the way through it to set expectations for what is the deliverable maybe next week, what is the deliverable in 2 weeks, what is the final deliverable. If you can set those kind of clear expectations, and you're always building towards something. Methodologies, Agile, Waterfall, like these are all great, and kind of anything in between are all great for kind of getting you there, but they don't work unless you've got these very clear set of expectations for what is expected at particular points. It's important to say no. And not like, no, we'll never do this, but more like, no, that doesn't really work with where we are right now, and maybe we should consider a slightly different approach where we take these known circumstances and we can get like 3/4 of the way towards saying yes. So it's very often not a hard no, but it's more of a little bit. It's important to say yes. So sometimes, even if your budget won't allow it, you find room to say yes, because at the end of the day, this is really about a business relationship. And as with anything, you got to give a little, you got to take a little. Any money that you spend now is likely going to be recouped if everybody's happy at the end of the project and you continue working well together. And especially if it furthers the product development, it's important to kind of look at that as an investment. So it's a fairly, it's not like a straightforward thing. It can get kind of complicated, but that's why you communicate, you collaborate, and you set clear expectations with one another so that you can, when you say yes, know what you're saying yes to and kind of what are the ramifications of that. So what are the final grades of the project? Admittedly, I'm probably a little biased. This is my baby. But I would give us an A-. So the pros being that we delivered a fantastic and beautiful front-end website, and we delivered a great product. We have a happy client, even with the budget overruns. Everyone kind of agreed like we could have done better, and so at the end of the day, everyone's happy. We're continuing to work together, and it leads into the final point, which is this only furthered our relationship with them. It, and they just have a fantastic website that they're really happy with, and we're really happy with the work, and they love the content management system, and they're probably going to help us kind of redesign the design of it, so everybody wins. The con, unspoken expectations complicated the final part of the project. That's probably the biggest thing to take out of it, and is why communication, collaboration, why these are all so important, and it's important not to take anything for granted. Most important thing, and something that we could have done a lot better. And then finally, here's my contact information. You can reach me on LinkedIn, and of course, you can always send me an email at berman.alexander647@gmail.com. And thank you.
Awesome. Great talk. Great talk. And again, I want to just thank our speaker, Alex Berman, the UX team lead at Rubenstein Technology Group. for today's really interesting and deep discussion on managing mixed role teams and delivering an awesome product. And as always, the presentation will be posted on our SlideShare channel. And also a big thank you from me, Jeremy Horn, the product guy, and to everyone else who joined us today in the Product Mentor. And also don't forget, if you're interested in being a product mentor, like today's speaker, Alex, to product people of all sorts, visit theproductmentor.com and sign up today. Session 6 starts January 8th, and we're always looking for more product mentors, so sign up and we'll speak to you pretty soon. Also, if you're looking to fill a new product job with a great product person, visit our very own free-for-all job board at theproductjobs.com. With all that said, I'll see you guys all at the next talk. Bye.